My husband brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner and used our 8th year of marriage as the room where he planned to erase me. Graham Pritchard stood before the cake I had ordered, lifted his glass, and looked around like every person there had been invited to witness my replacement. Portland rain tapped against the windows, soft enough to make his voice sound even colder when he said, "I should be honest tonight." Celeste Ward sat near the end of the table under the harmless title of brand consultant, but her stillness had the shape of preparation. No one laughed, because this was not a toast, and everyone in that private room understood it before I did. Sabrina Holt stopped with her fork in her hand. Blythe Carver went completely still beside me, and Patricia Pritchard held her polite smile too tightly. Graham looked at his colleagues first, then his mother, then Celeste, and finally me, as if affection required witnesses before it could be denied. "I have never loved Maris," he said, without raising his voice, and the sentence landed clean because he had clearly practiced keeping it calm. For a moment, the room did not breathe, and I noticed the smallest proof before I felt anything break inside me. Celeste lowered her eyes half a second too late. Not shocked, not wounded, only careful, like a woman waiting for a cue she already knew. Graham kept standing, almost gentle now, and added, "She is capable, reliable, almost flawless at keeping things together." That was when I understood the cruelty was not spontaneous. He was not confessing a feeling. He was presenting a case. The cake candle burned between us like some small, stubborn witness, and nobody reached to blow it out. Patricia leaned forward and whispered, "This is not the place," but the warning came toward me instead of the son who had chosen the room. I placed my napkin beside my plate, because I would not give them trembling hands, raised voices, or the ugly ending they had prepared for me. "He chose the place," I answered, looking straight at Graham. "I'm only choosing the exit." His face changed then, not with remorse, but with surprise that I had stepped out of the role assigned to me. Celeste finally looked up, wearing sympathy so polished it almost reflected the candlelight, and that confirmed more than any accusation could have. I stood, took my coat from the chair, and let the room keep the humiliation he meant for my shoulders. At the door, I turned once and gave him the only truth he had earned. "Then you shouldn't have needed me to make you look decent for 8 years. Outside, the Oregon air was cold and wet, and for the first time in years, nothing in me moved to fix him. Before that dinner, my marriage did not look broken, because I had become excellent at making damage look organized from the outside. I was a senior logistics strategist for a Portland wine distributor, paid to keep restaurants, hotels, and contracts from falling apart. At work, that skill had a title, a salary, and consequences when people ignored it. At home, it became invisible the moment Graham Pritchard benefited from it. He traveled for client dinner, winery weekends, and hotel galas while I kept the house moving as if his absence weighed nothing. Bills cleared before reminders arrived. Patricia's gifts appeared wrapped, and our shared calendar looked cleaner than either of our conversations. Graham never ordered me to handle everything, which made the arrangement harder to name when it started costing me. He simply left problems where I would find them, trusting my hands to close around them before refusal became possible. One Saturday, I was dressed to meet Blythe Carver when Graham turned his laptop toward me at the kitchen island. "It should only take 10 minutes, he murmured, pointing to a cost discrepancy in an event report due before noon. 10 minutes became 2 hours of vendor codes, missing receipts, and Graham, waiting behind me with coffee, cooling untouched. Blythe's message arrived while I was still fixing his numbers. "You didn't cancel. Maris, you were absorbed." That sentence stayed because the spreadsheet had already proven it before she ever put the words on my screen. I had not chosen Graham's emergency in one dramatic sacrifice. I had slid into it like a chair pulled out for me. When he closed the laptop, his relieved hand touched my shoulder like gratitude, not recognition of what he had taken. Then he walked upstairs, leaving my coat beside a morning that no longer belonged to me. At work, Sabrina Holt saw the version of me who rerouted delayed shipments and calmed 3 account leads before lunch. She told me regional director was becoming real, with broader accounts and decisions that would finally carry my name. I carried that news home carefully, because wanting something for myself still felt like bringing flame into a dry room. Graham listened from the dining table, folded his hands, and asked, "How would that affect the house?" Nothing in his voice was cruel, and that was exactly why the question landed so cleanly. He did not ask whether I wanted the role, only what my ambition might disturb inside the life I maintained. Days later, Patricia praised me at brunch as the woman who gave Graham the order he needed. I smiled because the table was full, and because I had not yet learned usefulness could become disappearance. By the week before our anniversary, Graham's event season had swallowed every conversation about my future with the manners of a schedule conflict. I told Sabrina I needed more time, then called timing responsible because fear sounded weaker and less practical. She accepted it with the disappointment of someone watching a capable woman step backward from an open door. I did not know Graham would soon slam another door in public, and this time, I would not hold it shut. Celeste Ward did not enter my marriage like a storm. She entered it like a woman who had already been given the floor plan. I first noticed it at a tasting event in the Pearl District, where Graham introduced her as a brand consultant with careful neutrality. She knew which clients preferred private labels, which hotel accounts were sensitive, and which stories Graham used when he wanted people relaxed. Then she turned to me with a smile that felt almost practiced and murmured, "Graham says you're the reason everything stays so smooth." It sounded like praise, but her eyes did not move like someone offering kindness. They moved like someone confirming a job description she had already read. I laughed softly because the room was full of clients, glasses, and expensive manners. But something in me went quiet. Celeste was not admiring my place beside Graham. She was measuring the place she planned to step into. The evidence was small, but it was sitting there in her sentence, neat as a label on a file. 2 weeks later, she let another truth slip at a rooftop event. Graham insisted I attend because appearances mattered. I had asked whether her consulting work was mostly for corporate clients, and she gave me that soft smile again. "Sometimes people need help saying their real truth without looking cruel," she answered, before adding that Graham had always felt I was too controlled to be emotionally reachable. I had never said those words to her, and Graham had never said them to me, which meant the conversation had happened somewhere I was not invited. I did not confront him that night, because confrontation without proof would have given Graham exactly what he liked best: a vague, emotional mess he could cleanly deny. Instead, I began noticing what had always been available to me, including the shared account Graham treated like a convenience drawer. There was a payment-marked brand positioning consult, paid to Celeste Ward from money that belonged to our household. It was not a crime by itself, but it was not a dinner receipt, and it was not harmless either. Blythe looked at the statement at her kitchen table and kept her voice low enough to keep me steady. "Do not hack anything. Do not post anything. And do not send him one angry paragraph," she warned, tapping the paper with one finger. I nodded, because her warning made the path cleaner, not smaller. I had legal access to the account, to messages sent to me, and to emails Graham had already placed inside our shared household systems. That was enough to begin seeing the shape of what they thought I would never read. The real turn came after the anniversary dinner. When I searched for the guest flow email Graham had forwarded weeks earlier, I was not looking for betrayal. I was looking for timing. Seating. Anything that explained why Celeste had looked ready. Buried under the event notes was an older attachment from her, titled Narrative Transition Draft, written in the polished language of professional damage control. It advised Graham to share his emotional truth, in a controlled social setting, before Maris could define the separation through pain. The sentence did not say, "Destroy your wife," but it did not need to, because the room, the toast, and Celeste's calm face had already translated it for me. By morning, Graham had called 42 times, and the number looked less like panic than a man counting damage he could not contain. I listened to one voicemail in Blythe's kitchen, my overnight bag still zipped beside the chair, my phone cold in my palm. Things were said in the wrong setting, his voice insisted, as if the table mattered more than the wound he opened. He never apologized for the sentence, only for the witnesses who had heard him deliver it. That was enough to tell me the plan had not ended when I walked out of the restaurant. Graham still needed the story to become private, messy, emotional, and mine to explain, because calm evidence was dangerous to him. I drove home before noon, not to reconcile, but to collect what belonged to me before he rearranged the scene. The house looked untouched, almost insulting, because nothing there had ever shown the labor required to keep it beautiful. Graham stood in the kitchen, already reaching for the version of himself that handled difficult conversations without admitting fault. "We need to talk privately," he began, and I kept walking because privacy had become his favorite place to bury consequences. "Private is what you wanted after you made it public," I answered, opening the closet for my coat and document box. His mouth tightened. Then Patricia arrived with concern, arranged for display, and murmured, "Marriage has humiliating moments," as if humiliation were weather. I folded a sweater into my bag before I looked at her, because steady hands were the only answer she deserved first. "No, Patricia. Marriage has hard moments. Humiliation is a choice." When shame failed, Graham tried money, his voice softening like he was offering a practical solution instead of another trap. He suggested staying in the house while I rented somewhere else, and I told him every discussion would go through an attorney. The proposal asked me to leave the marital home and trust the man who had staged my erasure. Celeste's message arrived before I reached Blythe's car, polished enough to feel written for a record someone else might read. "I hope you can handle this with dignity," she wrote, pretending distance while stepping directly into my marriage. I did not answer, because anger in writing was the gift they had been waiting for. I took a screenshot, saved it with the shared account statement, and let silence stay cleaner than anything I could type. Sabrina called that afternoon and told me the room had not believed Graham's version. She had watched me leave without shouting, threats, or the collapse his speech seemed designed to provoke. That mattered because Graham needed me unstable, anything that would make his cruelty look like escape. By evening, his calls slowed into messages about talking responsibly and not letting outsiders misunderstand our marriage. I read only the previews, because every careful phrase repeated the same confession, without meaning to. Graham did not want repair. He wanted control over the shape of the damage. The trap was simple, and by refusing to thrash inside it, I had made him stand alone in the room he built. I hired a family attorney 2 days after Graham tried to make my restraint look like confusion. Not because I wanted a war, but because I had finally understood the difference between leaving and being managed out. Her office was downtown, quiet and practical, with no soft language around hard facts. She read Celeste's message, the shared account statement, and Graham's voicemail before saying, "Keep everything clean, and let the documents speak first." That became the rule I followed because it was stronger than rage and safer than giving Graham another scene to edit. My attorney sent a preservation letter requesting financial records tied to household funds, consulting payments, and any communication involving planned separation language. It did not accuse him of a crime, and it did not need to. The request simply placed his polished story beside dates, payments, witnesses, and the words he had chosen in writing. The first document was the payment to Celeste Ward for brand positioning, drawn from money Graham and I both used for our household. The second was her narrative transition draft, with careful phrases about sharing emotional truth in a controlled social setting. The third was a message Graham had sent a client, promising he would be publicly separated soon and that the optics were being handled. None of it screamed affair, but together it showed preparation, where he had wanted everyone to see honesty. I did not post screenshots, call his clients, or send Celeste the paragraph she was clearly waiting to receive. I went to work, answered emails, and let people who had witnessed the dinner decide what they had witnessed. Sabrina later told me one of Graham's largest charity clients had asked his company why their gala lead had used an anniversary dinner to humiliate his wife. He was not fired in some dramatic collapse, but he was removed from that account before the week was over. Celeste lost ground differently, because her own language turned her from consultant into participant. A lifestyle client dropped her after learning she had advised a married man on controlling the public story of his separation. She tried calling it private positioning work, but the dinner made that excuse sound dirty before anyone argued with it. The problem was not that people misunderstood Celeste. The problem was that her draft helped them understand her perfectly. Graham accused me, through his attorney, of damaging his reputation by letting outsiders discuss our marriage. My attorney's answer was short enough to feel almost rude. Mistress has not distributed private material, and your client created the public event himself. In mediation, Graham wanted a broad silence clause covering the events surrounding our separation. I agreed not to defame him, but I refused to sign away the right to tell the truth about my own life. That was the moment his composure thinned enough for me to see the fear underneath it. He had wanted the room, the witnesses, and the cruelty, but not the record those things created. I sat across from him without raising my voice, while my attorney crossed out the clause that would have made my silence his final asset. Graham had built a story where I disappeared quietly, and the documents kept putting me back in the room. The regional director role was still open when Sabrina stopped beside my desk, with the kind of look that did not waste pity. They need someone who can commit without asking permission from a house that never thanked her, she said, and the sentence found the exact bruise. I walked into the meeting that afternoon with Graham's silence clause still unsigned and Celeste's draft still sitting in my attorney's file. When they asked if I was ready, I answered, yes, fully, and heard my own voice land without apology. Patricia tried one final message about moving forward gracefully, but grace had become another word people used when they wanted women quiet. I answered once, with my coat hanging in my new apartment and the Willamette River moving gray beyond the glass. Grace is not silence. Please contact my attorney. After that, I blocked her, not because I was cruel, but because access was no longer something they inherited through my exhaustion. Celeste emailed that she and Graham never meant to hurt anyone, as if intention could erase planning, payment records, and a dinner table full of witnesses. I forwarded it to my attorney and closed the laptop, because I had learned that not every sentence deserved my pulse. The mediation ended with a fair division under Oregon law, my separate property protected, and no clause that turned my life into Graham's private file. He kept enough to live, but not enough to keep pretending he had been noble. I moved into a quiet apartment near the river and opened the confirmation email, naming me regional director before I unpacked the last box. Graham had wanted me to disappear, but all I had done was stop serving the version of his life that required my erasure. People still remembered the anniversary dinner, only not the way he planned. They remembered the man who stood up to humiliate his wife, and the woman who walked out whole. Thank you for staying with Mistress's story. If her quiet strength, clean exit, or new beginning felt familiar, share where you're watching from and what stayed with you most. Subscribe for more stories about women finding peace, dignity, and a life that finally feels fully their own.